How do you make it full screen again?
Down to the bottom right, Mахарадж.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so we'll have a Gita crash course, which is covering the main points from Bhagavad-Gita. We'll try to do it in less than an hour. Om Gyantimirandasya Chaksuramilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Swayam Rupakadam Mayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Brahma Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Tay Mahat Prema Puravibur Nirmaikshati Adamusha Purushavam Tegunan Sudasa Sudasatmaka Yalang Krishista Bhagavan Vacham Sime Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So this is Bhagavad Gita crash course, and we'll be looking at all the connections of the topics of Bhagavad Gita chapters, summary, and key verses which can help us to understand the structure of Bhagavad Gita, so that whatever place from Bhagavad Gita you read, you can connect it to the whole. And before we start, we'll look at one of the last verses of Bhagavad Gita. This is chapter 18, text 70, which helps us to understand what does it mean to study Bhagavad Gita. Adhyashyate chayaibam dharmyam sambadhamavayo jnana yegenatenaham istasya miti me mati. And I declare that he who studies this sacred conversation of ours worships me by his intelligence. So interesting to see that the words jnana yagena means sacrifice of knowledge. So this is what it literally means. To study Bhagavad Gita means to perform sacrifice, and it helps us to understand that this sacrifice is very different from religious rituals. There is no fire, there is no priest, but the principles are there of sacrifice, and this will be the first and foremost topic of Bhagavad Gita, yagya, and it means that we have to sacrifice our interests for the sake of serving the Lord. So whether there are any rituals or not, as long as this principle is followed, this is the sacrifice, as Prabhupada explains. And now, looking at the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, there are 5 topics mentioned by Srila Prabhupada: Karma, Kala, Ishvara, Jiva, and Prakriti. Activities, time, controller, soul, and nature. And there is a reason why they are divided into 2 parts by different colors, because Karma and Kala are connecting points for the main topics of Bhagavad Gita, which are Ishvara, Jiva, and Prakriti. and there is a connection between them. Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, he is on the top of everything and everyone, and through the media of time, Kala, he is influencing both jivas, living entities, and prakriti, nature. And jiva and prakriti are connected through karma. So this is how the 5 topics connected to each other. And incidentally, the word yoga means connections. So Bhagavad-Gita is the yoga shastra, yoga scripture. And therefore, all chapters of Bhagavad-Gita are entitled yogas. And the first 6 chapters are in the section of karma yoga, how to connect our activities in the service of the Supreme Lord. Then middle 6 chapters are Bhakti yoga, how do we develop our relationship with Him, loving devotional service. And last 6 chapters are Jnana yoga, understanding basically 3 modes of nature and how we become conditioned, and so how can we become liberated from this conditioning. And in order to make it easier, we made kind of counter of Bhagavad-Gita. Number 1 is Bhagavad-Gita is one and only scripture spoken by the Supreme One, and that Krishna is the Supreme Lord. That's mentioned in a number of places in Bhagavad-Gita, like chapter 10, text 8. And Bhagavad-Gita is conversation between 2. So point number 2, 2 friends on the same chariot, 2 birds on the same tree, which means 2 souls in the same body, soul and super soul. And Bhagavad-Gita is consisting of 3 main divisions of yoga, as we already mentioned: karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga. There are 4 benefits coming from applying Bhagavad-Gita in our lives. There are many more, but at least the final verse of Bhagavad-Gita mentions 4 benefits, which is opulence, success or victory, influence, and morality. And 5 are 5 main topics of Bhagavad-Gita: karma, kala, ishvara, jiva, and prakriti. So if you remember these 5 points, you can explain Bhagavad-Gita to anyone in 5 seconds. So now, application of Bhagavad-Gita, that's the most important thing, because Bhagavad-Gita is not just philosophical book, but it is kind of manual for life. And Srila Prabhupada explains very interesting point in the purport to Srimad Bhagavatam 1.9.21. So he says, He, Krishna, is Paramatma, or the Super Soul, present in everyone as the supreme guidance, and therefore he is already the chariot driver and counsel of all living beings. When he therefore exhibits himself as chariot driver of Arjuna, there is no change in his exalted position. It's the power of devotional service only that demonstrates him as the chariot driver or the messenger. It doesn't fit in, but anyway. So basically, this is the relevance of Bhagavad Gita in our lives, because in the same way as Arjuna was seated on the chariot with Krishna, so chariot is the body, Krishna is the super soul, and we are next to him as individual soul, and his role is exactly the same as on Arjuna's chariot, because he is guiding us, and he actually, controls the body through the modes of nature. Modes of nature are like reins in Krishna's hands. So without Krishna we can't do anything. And so basically it's exactly the same, because material world is the big battlefield, like Kurukshetra. Everybody dies every second. But those who haven't died yet, they think it will not happen to them. And so if we follow Krishna's guidance, then we can achieve immortality. We'll never die. But if we fail, we can die at any time. So that's why Bhagavad-Gita is very relevant in our lives as well. And this is Paramatma in the heart, as depicted in Prabhupada's books. And in order to understand Bhagavad-Gita better, we look at, it says, don't judge the book by the cover, but people do it anyway. Look at the cover first. So we'll look at the cover verses, the very first and the very last verse of Bhagavad-Gita, and they're also connected, because the very first verse is the question from Dhritarashtra. So let's chant this together. Dhritarashtra vacha. Together. Darukshetre kurukshetre samavetayutsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kimakurvata sanjaya. So Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjaya, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra desiring to fight, what did they do? It's kind of strange question, is it not? That people came together desiring to fight, so what did they do? Have they decided to play baseball or something? So, but actually Dhritarashtra is trying to cover his real intention. He wants to know whether there are any chances for victory, right? It's pretty obvious that they're gonna fight, but what will be the outcome? So he's asking, this is the first verse, he's asking this question, and Sanjaya is giving very straightforward response in the very last verse of Bhagavad Gita, 1878. So let's chant it together as well. Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara, Tatra Shir Vijayo Bhutir Dhruva Nitir Matir Mama. Wherever there is Krishna, the master of all mystics, and wherever there is Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will also certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. That is my opinion. So basically speaking, no chance, no victory. And in order to enable Arjuna to become victorious, Krishna didn't even have to fight. It was just enough for him to be present next to Arjuna and counsel him. And so now we'll have a glance at all 18 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita. As we were mentioning, the original titles are all yoga. And so the first yoga, the first chapter is Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Literal meaning of the word Vishada is lamentation or grief. So Arjuna was lamenting because he had to fight with his teachers and relatives. And he came to that conclusion when he was observing the armies on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And even though he was lamenting, it was still yoga, interesting yoga of lamentation, because he was next to Krishna. And so even in the worst situation, devotee is still safe because Krishna is looking after him. And so next chapter, Sankhya Yoga, which is contents of the Gita summarized, summary. Sankhya means to count, right? So contents. The entire Bhagavad Gita is summarized in chapter 2. But then, of course, everything's mentioned, but one topic is unique to chapter 2, which is difference of the soul from the body, position of the soul, very elaborately explained in that chapter. And then Arjuna was not exactly satisfied by this brief explanation. He wanted elaboration. So basically, elaborate explanations start from chapter 3, Karma Yoga. And Bhagavad-Gita is amazingly structured. You can see that Krishna is doing a perfect presentation, introduction, summary, and then he starts explanation from chapter 3 to 17, and then he makes the conclusion at chapter 18. So basically speaking, perfect presentation means you speak on the subject thrice. First, give summary, what are you going to cover? Second, elaborate. And third, make the conclusions, what you wanted your audience to capture, right? So Krishna is a perfect teacher in that sense as well. And so, yeah, the Karma Yoga really starts the first section of Bhagavad Gita, which is Karma Yoga, right? And you can see that the chapter 12 is the last chapter of Bhakti Yoga section, so it's called Bhakti Yoga. So very interesting. And Karma Yoga basically means sacrifices. Its sacrifices are explained in this, and the importance of those sacrifices. And actually, Krishna tells Arjuna, you have to sacrifice your family attachments for my sakes. That would be Arjuna's sacrifice. And then Jnana Yoga, Transcendental Knowledge, next chapter, is explaining how everyone sacrifices according to one's position in the society. And of course, you have Guru, who would be master of sacrifices, and he would be helping us to understand what kind of sacrifice is relevant for our positions. And then chapter 5, Sannyasa Yoga, which is Karma Yoga, action in Krishna consciousness, is very interesting because it helps us to understand how do we act in a detached way for the sake of purifying our hearts. And chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, explains that heart is the residence of the Supersoul. So if we want to be connected to the Supreme Lord, we have to purify our hearts. And then once we are connected to the Supersoul, we can actually be properly guided in our spiritual path. And then with this guidance, we can actually start the Bhakti Yoga, which is middle 6 chapters. And chapter 7 starts with Vijnana Yoga, which is knowledge of the Absolute. Very interesting because it is explaining how Krishna is everywhere and Krishna is in everything. So it's interesting that Karma Yoga brings us to the level of Paramatma, but then Bhakti Yoga will start from Brahman again, from the level of energies, seeing Krishna everywhere and in everything. But it is also important for our service because we should understand that everything belongs to Krishna. And if we acknowledge this and use everything in Krishna's service, we can remember Him throughout our lives. And then as a result, we can remember Krishna also at the time of death, which is chapter 8 elaborates upon. Taraka Brahma Yoga, attaining the Supreme, because if we remember Krishna at the time of death, we go to Krishna. And then chapter 9, Rajaguhya Yoga, the most confidential knowledge, we can understand how to deal with Krishna personally. So this chapter has many confidential points. For example, helps us to understand that you can feed Krishna, you can do everything for Krishna, you can have personal exchanges with Krishna, and even glorifies Srimati Radharani in one verse. This is 9:13. That's why we sing Jai Radha Madhava before reading Bhagavad-Gita. Some people might challenge, where is Radharani in Bhagavad-Gita? Why do we sing Jai Radha Madhava? But Krishna is glorifying Radharani in this verse. Mahatmanastu mam partha daivi prakritim ashrita. He says that the great souls, they take shelter in daivi prakriti, in divine nature. And Prabhupada says divine nature means Radharani. So Krishna says, the best of my devotees are taking a shelter of Srimati Radharani. So, not even in me. So, very high glorification, very confidential knowledge. And this chapter ends with a statement which will be again reiterated in chapter 18, which covers the entire process of bhakti in a nutshell, because it consists of three steps: sambandha, philosophical understanding of our relationship with Krishna; abhideya, practice of devotional service; and prayojana, attaining the topmost goal, which is love of God. And then basically everything seems to be covered. But then chapter 10, next chapter, Vibhuti Yoga, the opulence of the Absolute, Krishna says, now I will tell you the knowledge which is even better than the one I explained to you before. So how can anything be better than confidential knowledge? But from Krishna's point of view, it's very easy, because he will not tell anything new, but he will expand chapter what he explained in chapter 9. And so chapter 10 is really an expansion of chapter 9. You can see the last verse where Krishna explained Sambandha, Abhideya and Prayojana will be unpacked in Chatur Shloki in chapter 10, texts 8 through 11. All these stages will be separately explained, and we'll come back to those verses. And his opulences he briefly mentioned in chapter 9 will be illustrated in a very interesting way in chapter 10. For example, Krishna will say, of the fishes I am the shark. And why shark and not whale, for example? Whales are much bigger than sharks. But shark represents Krishna because sharks are death personified. So even if an atheist faces the shark, he will say, oh my God. He will recognize Krishna in the shark. Because in front of death, there are no atheists, right? So very kind of interesting examples are given in chapter 10. And then Arjuna kind of listened to those explanations. And so his curiosity became aroused. So he kind of listened to audio, and then he wanted video as well. So chapter 11, Krishna is showing him everything. That's Vishwarup Darshan Yoga, the universal form. And this chapter is kind of, seemed to be off the track, because it was all philosophy, but then suddenly this universal form comes out. But the purpose of that was actually to show Arjuna a very important thing, that he is meant to be victorious on this battle, so to encourage Arjuna and give him confidence and explain to him that he is meant to be an instrument in Krishna's hands. So that's 11:33. And the final verse of the chapter, actually many times the last verses of the chapters are very important. And so this final verse, 11:55, is also very powerful because it gives 5 ingredients for attaining perfection in Krishna consciousness. And we'll look at this verse separately, because Srila Prabhupada says that this is the essence of Bhagavad-Gita, 11:55 in the purport. And then chapter 12 is summarizing the Bhakti Yoga section. That's why it's called Bhakti Yoga Devotional Service. Very short chapter, and basically speaks on the stages of devotional development, kind of the ladder of spiritual advancement from top level down to very basic level, and finishes with explaining the qualities of a devotee. And then chapter 13 starts the final section, which is Jnana Yoga. And as we were mentioning, amongst the 5 topics of Bhagavad Gita, 3 are the primary ones, Ishvara, Jiva and Prakriti. And so, basically speaking, if you look at the English translation of the chapter, Prakriti, Purusha, Viveka, Yoga, Nature, Danger and Consciousness, you can see 3 topics listed here. So basically chapter 13 helps us to understand the dynamics of relationship between Ishvara, Jiva and Prakriti, how the living entity is trying to enjoy this material nature, and how the Lord is controlling everything. And of course, those attempts to enjoy result in failure and misery. And then again, Krishna's expertise in presentations. He gives all 3 topics, explains how they interact, but then he takes them separately in next 3 chapters. Chapter 14, Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, he explains the 3 modes of material nature, Prakriti. Chapter 15, Purushottama Yoga, the yoga of the Supreme Person, Ishvara. And Daivasura Sampad Vibhaga Yoga, the divine and demoniac natures, he explains the topic of jivas. And then chapter 17 is Shraddha-traya Vibhaga Yoga, the divisions of faith. Basically, the opposite is described to what chapter 13 is explaining, because it helps us to understand how jiva, even though conditioned by Prakriti, can reinstate one's position in relationship to Ishvara through the process of faith. And faith is also influenced by the 3 modes, right? So in order to become unconditioned, we have to follow the faith which is not influenced by the lower modes. And so we cannot see it here, but we can remove that bar, right? We can. How do we do it? So the final chapter, I don't think so.
Just double click it, left click or right click. No, it's supposed to go over there.
Anyway, doesn't matter. The final chapter, Moksha Yoga, conclusion, the perfection of renunciation. So basically speaking, that chapter is summarizing the entire Bhagavad-Gita, and that's why, for example, 2 out of 3 repeated statements of Bhagavad-Gita, which we'll look at, appearing in chapter 18, as well as many other important points. So that's all 18 chapters at a glance. And now we'll look at key verses of Bhagavad-Gita. Why they are key verses? Because Srila Prabhupada highlights their importance in purpose. And so 330, he says that this is the purpose verse of Bhagavad-Gita, because it explains what Bhagavad-Gita is trying to encourage Arjuna and us in. And so this text, let's chant it together. Mayi sarvani karmani sanyasya dhyatma chetasa nirashir nirmamo utva yudhyasva vigata jvara. So it says, therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. So basically speaking, Yudhyasva, fight. Krishna wants Arjuna to fight. And this was the purpose why he spoke the whole Bhagavad Gita. And so we're also meant to fight, which means act for Krishna's pleasure without any personal motivations. Mai sarvani karmani, dedicate all your activities unto me. Then, so this is transcendental level, right? Fully dedicated to the pleasure of Krishna. But then sannyasa, renounce everything else, and adhyatma chetasa, understand me fully. So that's knowledge and renunciation, right? Mode of goodness. And then nirashar nirmamo bhutva, become free from asha, from any desires which are obstacles to that surrender. And nirmama, don't consider anything to be yours, right? So that's mode of passion, which have to be given up. And vigata jvara, give up lethargy, mode of ignorance. So amazing verse, right? Shuddha sattva, sattva, rajas, tamas, everything's there. So that's why this is the purpose of Bhagavad Gita, right? Gives us full formula how to succeed in Krishna consciousness and become perfect instrument in Krishna's hands, as Arjuna did. Whatever Krishna wanted him to do, Arjuna was perfectly following. And now we'll be looking at the Chatur Shloki, 4 seed verses of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, from 8 through 11, which describe the entire process of devotional service, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, and we'll see how it's done. So Krishna says, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. So that's Sambandha, right? And what it leads to, though the wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So theoretical understanding of Krishna helps us to start the process of devotional service. And then, what is that process? The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service. They derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So you can see this verse gives samples of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, etc., right? The 9 processes of devotional service. So Abhideya, practical application, and what the result will be. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me, to show them special mercy, I dwelling in their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So Krishna is basically giving us knowledge and destroys ignorance, right? So that's prayojana. And we were mentioning the final verse of chapter 11, which Srila Prabhupada defines as the essence of Bhagavad-Gita. Let's chant it together. Mat karma krin mat paramo mat bhakta sangha varjita nirvaira sarvabhuteshu yasamameti pandava. My dear Arjuna, he who engages in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of fruitive activities and mental speculation, he who works for me, who makes me the supreme goal of his life, and who is friendly to every living being, he certainly comes to me. So, again, 5 conditions which we have to follow to become perfect in our devotional service. First, again, mat karma krin, that dedicate all your activities unto me, similar to 330. Mat paramo, remember that I am the supreme goal. Sometimes we might think, if I'm already acting for Krishna, why this is important? Yeah, this is important because many times we start doing something for Krishna's pleasure, but then good results are coming and Krishna might be forgotten. So that's why it says, always remember Krishna, but never forget him. So mat karma kriyan, always remember Krishna by doing things for Krishna, and mat paramo, make sure you don't forget Krishna also, right? And then mat bhakta, become devotee. And what does it mean to be mat bhakta? That's elaborated in chapter 12 in series of verses, right? Devotee means certain qualities, not just, tilak and dhoti, nice devotee, as one merchant in Vrindavan says. So that's not enough, right? So there are many more important qualities than quality of the dress, right? Quality of dhoti. And all those qualities are listed in next chapter 12. And then sangha varjita, give up every kind of contacts which are unfavorable, and basically that is contamination of fruitive activities and mental speculation, right? Jnana and karma. Jnana karma dhyanavritam. And so jnana, karma is meant for sense gratification, and jnana meant for control. That's why people are getting high education, right? Because they understand, okay, I'll get my degree, I'll be the boss, right? And if I don't get my degree, I'll be, in a miserable position. Other people will be telling me what to do, right? But if I have a degree, I'll be on the top of things. So knowledge is meant for control. That's very clear. But these are 2 desires which keep us in this world, right? Desire to enjoy and control. So that's why karma and jnana is always mentioned. That has to be given up. Rather, they have to be transformed into karma yoga and jnana yoga, right? And then nirvaira. Nirvaira means, nirvaira sarvabhutishu means to have no enemies. That's very important. That's why the very first quality of the devotee mentioned, mat bhakta, is adveshta sarvabhutanam, not to be envious of anyone or not to hate anyone, right? No negativity. So this is where devotional service starts. And then yasamameti pandava, such a devotee definitely comes to me. And we can see that perfect devotees like Srila Prabhupada, they were exhibiting that equal attitude towards everybody, young, old, educated, uneducated, didn't matter. So this is devotional service. And now we'll look at 3 repeated statements of Bhagavad-Gita, and why are they repeated. First one is coming in chapter 3, text 23 and 411, and that is half verse, Mama Vartmanu Vartante Manusha Partha Sarvashaha, which means everyone follows my path in all respect, O son of Prita. This picture is meant to depict Milky Way. I'm not sure if it is, but Milky Way is kind of symbolic to the universal path. So Krishna is setting the path for everyone, which means everything is running according to Krishna's system, right? And so we can either follow the laws of God or break the laws of God. If we follow, we get benefit. If we break, we get ourselves in trouble. So that's the first statement. And second repeated statement is in chapter 3 again and 18, which is the conclusion of Bhagavad-Gita. And that is Shriyan Swadharma Vigunan Paradharmat Svanushtitat, which means it's far better to discharge one's own duties, even though imperfectly, than another duties perfectly. So that is the application in Varnashram, that Krishna is establishing structure for the social body, and everyone has to perform one's duties, and that is the mission of human life, that if we perform our duties for Krishna's pleasure, that is the foundation of our service, and that will help us to actually understand Krishna and establish our relationship with Krishna, because this is what Krishna wants us to do. Which brings us to the topmost repeated statement of Bhagavad-Gita in chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge, and 18, which is the conclusion. Man manabhav mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mam vaishyasi. Krishna says, engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, you will definitely come to me. So you can see that these are also resembling Sambandha, Abhideya and Prayojana, right? These 3 pairs of statements. This is the entire process of devotional service in a nutshell. And so by following this process, we can develop our relationship with Krishna and come to the abode of Krishna in the spiritual world, which is the purpose of human life. So this is what Bhagavad-Gita is teaching us. So that's all. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad-Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, if there are any questions.
I was wondering, Radharani, she's kind of hidden in that 9th chapter. Is that to protect her? Krishna is protecting her, so that the personalists don't blaspheme her, because she's hidden under like the divine or something like that.
Yeah, Krishna does not name Radharani directly in Bhagavad Gita, and even Srila Prabhupada in that purport doesn't mention Radharani, but he explains that in Nectar of Devotion and in few other places. He refers to that verse and he says, Krishna speaks about Radharani, but in Bhagavad Gita he doesn't say. So it's kind of confidential chapter, so Prabhupada also follows the mood. But the Daivi Prakriti refers to Radharani, because Srila Prabhupada says she is never separated from Krishna. Like he named the deities in New Delhi, Radha, Partha, Sarathi. And some of his god brothers were criticizing. What did he do? This seems to be Rasa Bhasa, right? Radha, Partha, Sarathi, because Partha, Sarathi is Sakhya Ras, right? That Krishna, who is the charioteer of Arjuna, but then how Radha is connected to that Krishna, right? Because he is not even Vrindavan Krishna, he is Vasudev Krishna, right? So why Radha is there? But Srila Prabhupada says it's all nonsense. Radha never separated from Krishna. She is always there. Even on Arjuna's chariot, she is present, but in invisible form. Like that. So, of course, Bhagavad-Gita and Kurukshetra, that's not obvious place where you would expect to see Radharani, but she is there always.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this is my humble obeisance. I have a question regarding the chapter on the universal form. You stated that in that chapter, the universal form was to declare to Arjuna that he would be victorious in battle. But I read some quotes of Srila Prabhupada when he said that if these atheistic rascals perceive themselves to be God, they have to show their universal form, or that there's another conception or idea that pure devotees are not attracted to the universal form of the Lord, but the personal form of the Lord. So is that also tied into that chapter as well?
Yeah, that's mentioned, that God has to be able to show his universal form. Yes, Arjuna was scared of the universal form, and then Krishna pacified him by showing him his personal form again. That was there, but this was major purpose of Krishna with Arjuna. He wanted him to be very confident that he will be victorious in this battle, because Arjuna was doubtful about the possibility of victory, because they were outnumbered, seriously outnumbered by the number of soldiers. It's explained in Bhagavatam that when Arjuna came and he looked at the Kaurava's army, he felt himself like a little fish in front of the ocean of the warriors, and in the midst of that ocean there were like huge Maharathis, like Bhishma, Karna, Drona, and even like Krishna's army was there, and he only had Krishna, but Krishna was not about to fight at all. He was just about to drive his chariot. So for Arjuna, and plus like fighting with Bhishma, they were immortal, like no one could kill him. How would you fight with such a warrior? So Arjuna had serious doubts about the possibility of victory at all. But then after chapter 11, it was all cleared. Hare Krishna.
Was this doubts of Arjuna were real Arjuna's doubts, or was it influenced by Krishna to narrate the Bhagavad-Gita?
Well, doubts were pretty real, but Krishna made him fall under the influence of the bodily concept of life in order to speak Bhagavad-Gita. Because suddenly he displayed a lot of attachment for his family members, even though he was fighting with them before without attachment. But then at that point he suddenly became attached.
But what was the ground of the doubts? Wasn't it the bodily platform? Wasn't this something different?
Well, that is explained that he was saying Kim Norajana Govinda, Kim Boga Jivitanava, that, oh Govinda, if we kill them all for the sake of, kingdom and everything, then all our enjoyment will be tainted with blood, so we won't be able to enjoy by killing our kinsmen. So that was his idea. You cannot enjoy, like he's preaching to Krishna, full first chapter. Very interesting. He explains to God what the Vedas mean, right? That's pretty serious illusion. But Krishna allowed him to become absorbed in that in order to speak Bhagavad-Gita. That's why, Krishna was smiling in the beginning when he was showing Arjuna the army, because he knew what will happen. Preaching to God, that's interesting, right? All right.
Just seems like you can be. Seems like if you read Bhagavad Gita and you follow it, you can become fully Krishna conscious. So what's the purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam and CC?
Well, Bhagavad Gita explains all the principles, but then Srimad Bhagavatam illustrates those principles with stories and gives more details, because details are often important. Like you can have huge machine, but one little part is missing, the whole machine becomes useless, right? So every little detail is important. That's why Bhagavatam is important. All right, Hare Krishna. Thank you. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanande. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. So we'll continue next Wednesday,
At 6:30.
6:30 p.m. Yes, Hare Krishna.